Hello, and welcome to MTG Another Look. These are cards that you should take another look at. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel. Thank you. Let's talk about Sludge Titan from Ravnica Clue Edition. It costs 4 and 2 green-black hybrid, 6 mana total. It's a 6/6 zombie giant with trample and reads, whenever Sludge Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 5 cards. You may put a creature card and or a land card from among them into your hand. Sludge Titan is a spiritual continuation of the Titan cycle that includes Primeval Titan and Grave Titan. They are 6/6s that usually have a keyword or other simple ability, and then a main ability that triggers when they enter the battlefield and when they attack. The Titans have gone from very playable in the early days of Commander to being sort of fringe playable nowadays. Some of them are still somewhat playable, especially in Blink strategies, and Primeval Titan has remained banned this whole time. Sludge Titan is an interesting case because I think the main ability that triggers on ETB and attack is actually better than it looks. It mills 5 cards, then can return a creature and or a land card to your hand. If you think about it in a different way, it fills the graveyard to fuel those strategies, but also puts 2 cards in your hand every turn. It's practically a slightly better divination every time it triggers. That can be a lot of card advantage. If you're in a deck that needs more card advantage, particularly attached to creatures, this is an interesting option. The ETB ability can be blinked, but probably more relevantly can trigger repeatedly when reanimated. And since the ability mills cards, it'll help you put your other reanimation targets into the graveyard at the same time. Since it's a large creature that presents a threat and the possibility of card advantage, it's a good target for your opponent's removal. Luckily, even if your opponent uses a removal spell on it, you'll still get the ETB effect and end up with 2 extra cards in hand. A removal spell used on this will mean you 3-for-1 your opponent and are gaining card advantage against them. Sludge Titan was one of the cards that released exclusively in the Ravnica and Clue crossover set, a pretty unpopular product, so it's definitely a card that's easy to miss. I think it's worth more testing, because even if there was a 6-drop Titan that just drew 2 cards on ETB and attack, I think it would be played quite a bit, not just for the strong blink synergies, or even because there are some colors that struggle to keep up with card advantage to this day, but just because Commander players love drawing cards. It's fun. But I think with so many similar but worse effects that mill cards but don't put you up cards in hand, it kind of blends in with the rest. There are a lot of cards like Grizzly Salvage that dump cards into the graveyard but only replaces itself with 1 card in hand. I think it's easy to read Sludge Titan the first time and kinda just assume it's not very good because of the dearth of unplayable cards doing things like it. Sludge Titan is definitely worth more testing, and definitely worth an include in more decks beyond the 400-ish that include it at time of writing. It would go great in Henzi Toolbox Tori, can be used to trigger the Wise Mothman's ability repeatedly, and can be fun to play in a Gerard Golgari Lichlord deck. Next, let's talk about Anem Pall, Thousandth Moon, from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. For 1 generic mana, a red and a white, you get a 1/2 legendary human soldier. Whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anem Pall, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anem Pall. Anem Pall is a generically strong aggro card, even in a 4-player game. It only costs 3 mana, and can put an immense amount of pressure on opponents early on. Just like with Adelaine Resplendent Cathar, Anem Pall can trigger the turn it enters the battlefield because it just needs a non-gnome creature to attack. It doesn't need to attack itself. And when the ability triggers, you get to pump Anem Pall and put a number of 1/1s into play tapped and attacking equal to the number of counters it has. It's actually very similar to Adeline, and both are very powerful aggressive creatures that can fit in any aggressive deck that fits the colors. Both scale to deal more damage as the game goes on and create other tokens already attacking to make your board wide. They synergize with token decks and token doublers like Anointed Procession. Token decks can have a tendency to make a lot of tokens, but then struggle to burst through a lot of blockers. Adelaine and Anem Pall help those token decks present an early threat that can put other players on the back foot and have to defend themselves. It may cause a player to make a suboptimal play instead of advancing their own long-term resources. Putting pressure on opponents early can win games. And just like other weenie decks with small creatures, Anem Pall will synergize well with Creature Pump, and especially ones that benefit based off the number of creatures entering the battlefield. War Leader's Call and Cathar's Crusade can turn an Anem Pall and a few tokens into a dozen or way more damage by themselves. Anem Pall also can benefit from proliferation effects or other effects that put more counters on it. It'll not only swing for more, but make more tokens based off of the number of counters it has at the combat step. But really, I don't think you even need to do that. I think both Adeline and Anem Pall can both just be put into any aggressive or mid-range decks that are looking to win quickly with combat damage. The number of tokens they create over the turns increases more quickly than you'd think, and put you in the driver's seat. Adeline has definitely proved to be a competitive card, and I play her as often as I can in decks that make sense. But in a few ways, I think Anem Pall can be stronger. The number of tokens Anem Pall makes grows way more rapidly over time if left alone. Adeline is capped at making 3 tokens a turn by itself, equal to the number of opponents you have, but over a couple of turns, Anem Pall can make 1 more than last time each of your attack steps. Anem Pall can fit into a Sentinel Sarah Lions deck that pumps your creatures and deals damage based off of the number of artifacts you control. It fits well in a Nayali Sun's Vanguard deck that cares about tokens and gets card advantage from attacking. Ginny Faye Jetmir II is also a good fit because it can upgrade your token creatures and make more non-gnomes to attack. Next, let's talk about Kogla the Titan Ape from Ikoria Lair of Behemoths. For 3 and 3 green, you get a 7/6 legendary ape. When Kogla the Titan Ape enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Whenever Kogla attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. You can pay 1 and 1 green to return target human you control to its owner's hand, and Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. Kogla is a card that fulfills a function that green decks are very hard up for: creature removal. Mono green decks have very few options for creature removal in color. You have Beast Within and maybe Azura's Predation. Most of green's removal is spotty and overcosted with the exception of Beast Within, all reliable. Since there aren't many effective options, green decks have to dip into fight or bite effects. But when you rely on instants and sorceries that fight or bite, you also rely on having a relevant creature that you want to fight or bite with. And that certainly opens you up to getting 2 for 1. An opponent can remove the creature that you're using to fight or bite, and then counter the instant or sorcery as well. So in a lot of cases, if you're not trying to use the bite plus death touch combination, it's wiser to use creatures that fight when they enter themselves. There are several playable versions of this effect, but Kogla is one of the best. It's efficient when it comes to mana cost and power to fight with. It can most of the time match or be larger than the power and toughness of the creature you want destroyed. Kogla does have the ability to survive fights by combining it with a human creature to return to hand. That is an upside that most of these fight creatures don't have, but I don't think it's necessary. It's an upside that can benefit you if it comes up, but you don't need to limit yourself to playing Kogla in decks that will consistently have a human to return. Using Kogla as a semi-disposable creature is still pretty good. If you only get to fight a smaller creature, send it to the graveyard, and then later let it be removed by a spell, you still secured a 2 for 1. I think that's reasonable enough. Lots of times in Commander, since every player is focused on card advantage and every color has some access to it, these little opportunities to get 2 for 1s or greater on your opponents add up and win you the war of attrition and often games as a result. But another huge upside is the ability to destroy artifacts and enchantments on attack if Kogla sticks around. In creature-heavy decks that want to have access to artifact and enchantment removal, your options are small creatures that destroy on ETB like Reclamation Sage, and small creatures that sacrifice to get the job done like Haywire Might. If you're in a Stompy deck, you may be wanting to pressure the board while destroying problem permanents instead of playing smaller, inconsequential creatures that don't pose much of a threat. Kogla provides a lot of value on a big body. As a commander, Kogla takes 3 hits to kill a player with commander damage. In the 99, Kogla is a large threat that can combine well with power doublers and haste enablers, like Xenagos, God of Revels. commanders that care about fighting, like Neith of the Dire Hunt, or commanders that need to find creatures that can perform the function of spells you'd normally play, like Rurik Thar, the Unbowed. Next, let's talk about a different kind of card. It's Meishin the Mind Cage from Saviors of Kamigawa. For 4 mana and 3 blue, you get a legendary enchantment that reads, all creatures get -X/-0, where X is the number of cards in your hand. That's an interesting effect. It's a card that can just turn off all creature combat for as long as it's in play. You'd only want to play this in a control deck that needs a few turns stalled so that it can get its more expensive win condition going. Or in a deck that's planning to win with a slow combo, maybe one that requires 3 to 5 pieces to win. Meishin can buy you time to assemble your combo pieces. In those decks, you'll definitely have quite a few cards in hand, as you'll be searching for your control finishers or combo pieces. One of the weaknesses of Meishin is discard effects. In 60-card formats, cards like this, even if the mana cost was a lot less, wouldn't be very reliable because discard is more heavily played there. Being able to keep your opponent's hand size down is a lot easier, and being able to pressure them quicker than this can come down is easier too, as it's one player focused only on you. But in Commander, each player has 3 other opponents to worry about, and often can't afford to be focusing you down alone. In Commander, it seems that discard is sort of frowned upon, almost in any form. I don't agree with that attitude toward discard. I think it's a vital part of the game that keeps control and combo decks in check, but a lot of people will have a negative reaction to being forced to discard any cards. Obviously, it's true that there are ways of making opponents discard their whole hands over and over in a game by looping Mind Slicers or something like it, and I think that goes a bit too far. That scenario would be similar to a hard stacks lock, and I understand how that's unfun and unwanted in most games. But just one-time hand discard effects or selective discard should be encouraged in the format. Just like with counterspells, how you absolutely need players to be able to just say no to a spell on the stack to stop combos or an approach of the Second Sun, you absolutely need discard to be able to punish decks that keep their win conditions in their hands. Those Simic value piles that just draw cards and ramp, and then go way over the top of other players, often not even relying on permanents to do it, are dominant in the format for a reason. And part of that reason is because discard is frowned upon. If your opponent has an over-the-top win condition and is about to play it and win the game, with no one able to interact with them, is that funner than having an actual back and forth and having another player interact with them and stop them by forcing them to discard their win condition? I think the interactive play is more interesting and more fun. Discard is a vital part of a healthy metagame and should be played a bit more often. But anyway, back to Meishin. Meishin can also be considered unfun by players, just like discard and counterspells, but I think it's a fair card by far. It's a temporary effect that goes away with one removal spell. It can shut down combat single-handedly for a few turns, but just like almost any other bomb, all you have to do is remove it. Commander is about trading cards back and forth until you build up enough advantage to win. You have to expect that your permanents will be removed, and you have to expect that you will have to remove permanents to have a chance at winning. Meishin works great in tandem with decks that deal combat damage based off their toughness, like Arcades the Strategist, in decks that aren't winning with combat damage and want to prevent being attacked before they can win, like Nekusar the Mindraiser, or decks that can be built to consistently return Meishin to hand on your turn to only turn off opponents' attacks, like Tameshi, Reality Architect. Lastly, let's talk about Burnway, a card originally from Khans of Tarkir. For 4 and a red, you get an instant that deals 6 damage to a creature and then exiles its controller's graveyard. The mana cost on this is a bit of a hefty one. 5 mana and a hold up for an instant is a whole lot, but Burnway can do something very uncommon in red. It can exile an entire graveyard. There are plenty of red removal spells that can destroy a creature and remove that creature from the game, and effects like that are still very useful and necessary to include in decks, but almost nothing in color can exile an entire graveyard. Pretty much every deck needs a few ways to disrupt opposing graveyard strategies, and if you're in mono red, your options are very limited. A lot of people would dip into artifacts and lands, and that's definitely part of the correct approach. Scavenger Ground should really be included in any mono red deck because it's simply the best option. I think Pit of Offerings, while worse, is probably still a necessary include. And beyond that, you'd be forced to play cards that only remove graveyards and would be useless in any situation that doesn't demand that niche effect. Burnway gives you graveyard hate attached to a different, very useful effect that you already want in your deck. Every deck needs creature removal, and every deck needs graveyard hate. Burnway allows you to play both in one card. You're paying a little bit of a premium mana-wise, but the options in red are so limited that we have to work with what we've got. I don't think every single deck needs Burnway specifically, but if your deck is lacking graveyard interaction, or you're playing a Spellslinger style deck and can maybe even copy your big red spells regularly, you should definitely take a look at Burnway to see if it's just what you need to fill a gap in your interaction suite. Burnway can be used to good effect in Imodane the Pyrohammer. It could fit in Melik Izzet Paragon, or be multiplied with Zevlor Elturel Exile. I want to say thank you to everyone that joined me today to discuss some cool commander deck options. What do you think of these cards? Are they worth a shot in one of your decks? Let me know in the comments and join me next time to take another look. Have a great day.